absolutely destroyed them. They absolutely outcoached Dan Quinn. By the way, why in the hell, out of 54 snaps, offensive snaps, are you playing 6+ DBs on 48 of them when a team's running the ball down your throat?
Say that again. They had 54 offensive snaps. They had 6 defensive backs on the field for 48 of the 54.
6+ for 48 of the 54 snaps. You don't do that when you're getting your brains kicked in. All right, running the football. How about we put bigger personnel on the field? How about we try to run blitz? Anything besides just taking an ass kicking. You dare blame Dak Prescott for this game.
What do you mean?
No, the defense stunk. I don't care how. Dak Prescott, I get it. Dak only threw for 403 yards, rushed for 45 yards. It's Dak Prescott's fault. The hell it is. This defense stunk. And that's you want to why'd they lose? Why'd they look like crap? Why'd they get out coached? I don't know. But point to the defense, period. Period.
You know what's interesting about Rex Ryan going off on Dan Quinn here about how he decided to play against the Green Bay Packers in this game for the Cowboys, as he played zone more than we have all season long. He left plenty of soft spots on the field in which Green Bay just absolutely picked apart. And dudes are running wide open, and we couldn't stop the run. So what happens when you can't stop the run and guys are running wide open and your defense never is able to get off the field? You can never get back into the game. Even if the offense would have scored touchdowns on every single possession after we fell behind, we would have never gotten back into the game because Green Bay was never forced to punt until like 5 or 6 minutes left in the fourth quarter. And that begs the question, is Dan Quinn even that good as a defensive coordinator, especially when you consider the fact that he turned this putrid Dallas Cowboys defense around the year after they had a historically bad outing, meaning literally anyone that would have came in and made this defense even a little bit better would have looked like an absolute genius. The Cowboys were coming off a season where they ranked almost at the bottom of the league in literally every defensive category. Then they got an injection of talent. You get a second year, Trayvon Diggs that's more comfortable playing that corner position. You get Micah Parsons in the draft that completely changes the dynamic of your defense and what you're able to do. And you bring in Jaron Kearse to shore up the safety spot a little bit on that team. And surely enough, the defense got comparatively much better than what it was the year before you got here. But if we actually take a look at the numbers, is Dan Quinn really all that great? Rex Ryan might have had a really, really good point here. I don't think Dan Quinn has gotten enough blame for Cowboys fans, especially considering for the past 3 seasons we've seen this defense progressively get worse and worse as the season goes on, and it has showed a clear lack of ability to adjust to offensive game plans that are taking advantage of soft spots in the initial defensive game plan. Let's take a look at some numbers that I'm sure is probably going to surprise you a little bit. The first number is a number that I actually did the number crunching myself as I went back and looked at the Cowboys schedule for 2021, 2022, and 2023, and I wanted to figure out exactly when we lose, what's happening? Why is it that we are losing? And is the defense performing well enough to where you would assume the offense should be able to win the games in which we are losing? And the answer is, usually, it would take a number one type of offensive performance to overcome the deficiencies of the defense when we do lose. You can take a look here. In 2021, the defense gave up an average of 27.33 opposing team points per game in the 6 losses that we had, including in the playoffs. That means the offense would have had to score 28 points per game to have won majority of those games that season. And 28 points per game is asking for a lot, especially when the other team has already put up damn near 30 and there's only 60 minutes in any given football game. Time of possession is a real thing, especially when your biggest weakness on your team is your inability to stop the rush. Running the ball is one of the easiest ways to not only control the clock, but also run down the clock and not leave enough time for a team to make a comeback, especially if your defense is giving up a ton of points and your offense hasn't matched the production of the opposing team. In 2022, they took a slight step forward, only giving up 26.83 opposing team points per game in 6 losses, including the playoffs, which essentially is really the same thing. If you round it up, they gave up 27 points per game in both 2021 and 2022 in their losses. So again, it would take a high scoring offense to have won these games in those losses. And in 2023, it got way worse. This is what I meant by the play of Dak Prescott. You know, the guy that got awarded an All-Pro for his play during the season. The play of Dak Prescott masked a ton of deficiencies for this Cowboys team, including the fact that our defense took a major step back as compared to years previously. You can see in 2023, the defense in our losses gave up an average of 33.33 opposing team points per game in 6 losses, including in the playoffs. 33.33 opposing team points per game. You tell me, how often do NFL teams score more than 30 points? Now, tell me how reasonable it is to expect an NFL team to have to score essentially 35 points per game to ensure that they're winning the games that they are losing. How reasonable is it to really expect a defense that was supposed to be the engine of this team? The defense was supposed to be the spearhead of this Cowboys team. We were supposed to go as the defense went, and in our losses, they gave up 34 points per game essentially, or 33 points per game if you round down. That is a staggering number, especially considering in those losses against the Cardinals, against the Packers, against the 49ers, against the Bills, in those losses, the teams ran the hell out of the ball. And as Rex Ryan said, when you're playing 6 defensive backs on the field, when the blueprint for beating this team and bullying this defense is to run the ball, playing 6 defensive backs makes absolutely no sense. That's when you want your fat guys on the field. That's when you would like to have true linebackers on the field. Now, granted, we were missing LVE this year in our linebacking crew. I want to count DeMarvion Overshown, but Dan Quinn has never actually had him in his defense, so you can't really count him and say he would have made a huge difference, although I'm sure he would have. Dan Quinn has never actually had him as a constant, so I'm not going to add him into this equation. So essentially, you're missing LVE out of your linebacker core and Trayvon Diggs in your secondary, which I'm sure is going to add up quite a bit, and it added up to almost 34 points per game for opposing teams, bro. I don't know about y'all, but with that type of defense, it would be damn hard to win any game. Now, this particular statistics look even more funny when you hold it up to the light, especially when you take a look at Dan Quinn's history and realize he really hasn't been that good of a defensive coordinator, head coach, or anything else unless he has Hall of Fame level players playing under him. In Seattle, he had a really good defense. His defense was #1 in yards, #1 in points, #1 in takeaways. The rushing defense was even stout. When you have guys like Cliff Averill and Michael Bennett and Frank Clark and the other guys that are on that defensive line, you would expect that. But the passing defense, rushing defense, and the overall defense for the Seattle Seahawks was absolutely amazing. There was no deficiency on that team from a defensive standpoint. They ranked top 8 in rushing defense in most categories, and in total defense, they were top 3 in most categories that were important between 2013 and 2014. When he left to Atlanta, however, his defenses completely fall off of a cliff. His highest ranking defense during his stint in Atlanta was in 2017 when his defense ranked #9 in yards, #8 in points, was 27th with takeaways, 9 in rushing yards, 6 in rushing touchdowns, and was essentially like a top 12 to 15 type of defense from a passing defense standpoint. His defenses in Atlanta beyond that year, and even that year wasn't all that great, were putrid. I'm talking about most of these years, the defense ranked in the bottom third of the league in pretty much every single category, whether it's passing or rushing. Dan Quinn's defenses look extremely funny when held to the light. And it makes you wonder, why is he getting so much credit for being this defensive guru? Why have we been looking at him like he's some type of defensive savant that's going to save the team and create this all-time great defense, when the only time he had an all-time great defense is when he had Bobby Wagner, Cliff Averill, Michael Bennett, Frank Clark, Richard Sherman, Earl Thomas, Cam Chancellor, and all these other guys that made that defense honestly what it was. That's the only time we've seen him have like a shutdown, lockdown defense.
And to add on to that point, if you actually take a look at it, his most successful year in Atlanta was because of Kyle Shanahan and that offensive system he was running with Matt Ryan, leading him to an MVP caliber season and to the Super Bowl. As soon as Kyle Shanahan left, that team fell off of a cliff.
Even since he's come to Dallas in 2021, do you guys realize that we've always had an extremely bend but don't break type of defense in which teams are able to freely run up and down the field on us, and unless we're generating takeaways, we're really not a good defense at all. In 2021 and 2022, the Cowboys were the #1 takeaway defense in the league. But then if you look at the other categories, they were number 7 and 5 respectively in points, and number 19 and 12 respectively in yards. Meaning teams were easily moving the ball up and down the field against the Cowboys, and we were generating takeaways, i.e., some luck was at play there, or you were relying on other teams to make mistakes. But our defense has not been good as it pertains to just locking the team down and being a get off the field defense. It's not a get off the field defense. It's a bend but don't break defense. Hope the other team makes a mistake and you generate a takeaway. If they're not generating takeaways, they're not only average, but in many cases they're below average as a defense. Let's look at this year in 2023. We had the #5 defense in yards, #5 defense in points, number 12 in takeaways, which means we had a huge drop off as it pertains to takeaways. One of the strengths of this defense actually became fairly average for this defense. And our rushing defense was absolutely trash across the board. It was literally middle of the road across every category. 16th in yards, 11th in touchdowns, 15th in yards per attempt. And then our passing defense was a little bit better, with ranking number 5 in yards, 10th in scoring, and 8th in takeaways or interceptions that was generated. But even then, the Cowboys didn't really have a top 5 defense. And again, this is a defense that is loaded with talent from top to bottom, but it has one extreme deficiency. In addition to Dan Quinn's funky schemes and teaching, loading up weird defensive fronts that's leaving obvious gaps, and having your DBs playing 10 yards off, he's also loaded up with players like Micah Parsons, Deron Bland, Stephon Gilmore, DeMarcus Lawrence, tons of pass rushers to throw at the opposing team. So he has plenty of talent, so you would expect the defense with this type of talent to do okay, but you definitely don't expect them to be average, which is pretty much what they were in every category outside of passing defense. And even then, they were kind of average where it matters, which is scoring. So my entire point with all of this is, it is 100% time for a change. And I firmly believe that any defensive coordinator coming in after what we had before Dan Quinn got here would have been made to look like a defensive savant. We could have had Jim Schwartz come in, and I'm sure he would have done just as good, if not a better job than someone like a Dan Quinn. We could have had other coaches come in here and do probably a better job than what Dan Quinn has been able to do, because as of right now, our defense, if we're not playing with the lead, is pretty average, and that's not a good thing. Either way, y'all let me know what you think about all this down in the comments below. You know how we have to end these videos now. We still them same old Cowboys. See y'all on the next one, man. Peace.
Calling me, texting me, paging me, asking me, am I still the ball? Y'all usually check on me. Listen. I'm still them boys. Hey! Woo! Hey! I'm still them boys.